Got a lot of scriptures to read this morning, so but jump around a little bit. That's strange for me. I usually don't jump around like that, but I don't know. This topic just sort of presented itself that way. Sometimes you just got to read a lot, right? And so today, as we think about Jesus goes up into the mountains, and of course his disciples follows him up, and they get up there, and he sits down. And everybody got assembled around, and he began to teach. Kind of an interesting way, you know. They tell me that was the custom in those days, was for the teacher to sit down and the students to stand, right? Now there's a good philosophy there. It's very logical, because if you do it that way, you don't have to worry about your students going to sleep on you. I mean, they're just not going to snooze off without making a lot of commotion around about. So it has its advantages there. But then came democracy, you see, and when democracy came in, the rule of the masses rule, then the students sat down and the teacher had to stand up. So that's why I'm standing up today before y'all. I'm very glad to be here. I thank the Lord for the opportunity to be here. So as the brother read this morning from Matthew 5, his first 5 verses there, as Jesus begins to teach. And he actually begins to teach in the same mode as the Proverbs. We were studying Proverbs this morning, you know, reading it, and as he begins to teach here on the Mount, as we call it, the Sermon on the Mount, it's that same type of teaching that we see there. And reading through some other commentaries and so forth on it, it's amazing what people can do with those scriptures. And you'll wonder sometimes where some of them are coming from. I really do. But you get all kinds of things like, well, Jesus was telling these people, you know, they needed to be poor. Because the poor people was going to get into heaven. How do you become poor? Well, I'll tell you. What you all do is you sell everything you have and you give the money to me, right? And then you'll all be poor and you'll all go to heaven. I don't know what that's going to do to me, but anyhow, there's people out there sort of teaching that sort of thing, you know. It's okay for me to drive around in my big Mercedes-Benz and live in, you know, having a house in every state and just about every country in the world, and not just a house, a mansion, you know, that sort of thing. But your poverty will get you to heaven. That's not what Jesus said there. Then there's other people that says, well, no, what he's saying is, he says, you follow me and I'll give you all the riches in the world. I'll just give you everything more than you need. The riches will start pouring in. First you got to give me a little bit of money back here. Oh yeah. Yeah, there's all kind of things out there going on. Same scriptures, just what people can do with them. And I puzzle over, you know, many times I puzzle over these because it almost sounded to me like in verse 3 there, a contradiction of the way that I tend to think. And so I knew I had to work with it. I knew I had to come up with a good spiritual answer. Because when it talks about, you know, he says in Matthew, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And to me that's almost a contradiction. It's the way you know, it depends on how you think about this word spirit, I guess. Because you would think, you know, if I'm on the kingdom of heaven, I should be rich in spirit, not poor. But no, the statement here says poor in spirit. So I know it's got to be talking about something that is going to benefit me spiritually. So it can't just sometimes you just can't take it real literal. You've got to dig in and find out what it's talking about. Actually, I find that Brother Luke also gives an account of this teaching. Let's flip over there. His wording is a little bit different, and so that helps a little bit. Flip over to Luke, the 6th chapter. Luke's got it in chapter 6. I'm probably going to get lost here with all the little things I've got stuck in here. We'll hope not, but I probably will. Luke chapter 6, and he starts down at about verse 20. Sure enough, I got lost already. I said Luke 6, and where do I wind up? I will wind up on chapter 19. Back me up here. Okay. That's the trouble when you put too many things in the book, you get lost. Chapter 6, and starting with verse 20. Okay. This looks like the place. Verse 20. You're all there now, right? Took me long enough. And turning his gaze on his disciples, he began to say, Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who hunger now, for you shall be satisfied. Blessed are you who weep now, for you shall laugh. Blessed are you when men hate you and ostracize you and cast insults at you and spurn your name as evil for the sake of the Son of Man. Oh, okay. Now things are taking on a little different view. What's he talking about? What's he talking about? He's talking a lot about attitude. Our attitude toward ourselves, our attitude toward our fellow man, our attitude toward our brothers and sisters in Christ, our attitude toward God. Whether it makes us rich or poor, I said it. So when I look at this now, I see, in my opinion, he's talking about humility. He's talking about humility and our attitude. Humility being, I know I have things to do, but I'm not trusting in myself, I'm trusting in God. I can do all things through Jesus. Without him, I can do nothing. And that's sort of the picture that I got. I say, I look at this and I say, it looks a lot like Proverbs, and sure enough it does. And if you go back to Proverbs, there's a lot in Proverbs that discuss those things. Let's flip back to Proverbs chapter 16 and verse 19. Chapter 16 and verse 19. Like Brother Anthony was saying there this morning, it's that these things, they sort of sound like they're scattered out and they're sort of together, and you sort of have to figure some things out, how they go together and that sort of thing. 16 and 19 it says, "It is better to be of a humble spirit with the lowly than to divide the spoil with the proud." And I sort of think that is the same message that he's trying to portray there in Matthew. That it's a humble spirit, not one of pride and boasting, but one of humility. One that looks out for the welfare of others, sometimes even though it may cost us personally, but the welfare of others become more. Looks out for the gospel of Jesus, no matter what the cost. No matter if somebody is staring you in the face with a sword and said, you know, you will denounce Jesus or I'll cut off your head. And you say, well, it's time for me to meet my Maker then, because I'll not denounce him. That's not through pride, that's through humility and our trust, our faith in God. So I think that's the attitude that is conveying to us in verse 3. In fact, I came up with some examples. And oddly enough, the examples I came up with are definitely not poor people. Not in earthly goods, anyway. But in this type of attitude, the humility, they show that humbleness to God. And that you might say that he's talking about the poor in spirit. For the first one, let's go over to the second book of Chronicles. 2 Chronicles, first chapter. In 2 Chronicles, the first chapter, Solomon has just taken the throne. David has passed on, and his son Solomon has taken the throne. So Solomon is not a poor man by any stretch of the imagination. He's the king's son, and now he's the king. And all that wealth is his. And after he has been established, God has established him, God presents him with a question, and he says, Solomon, you're the king now. How can I help you? This is God saying to him, what can I do for you? You know, when we stop to look at it, God often is saying to us, what can I do for you? We think, God don't need to say that. Hasn't he done enough? Well, yes, he has. But does he care? Does he want to do more? Yes, he does. And sometimes, we need to be humble enough to let him. Not only let him, but invite him. Say, Lord, I need you now. This is what I need. Solomon's reply was one, I think, that shows the spirit of humbleness. Going down, looking at chapter 1, starting with verse 7, Solomon makes his reply. Or actually, God is talking to him. And that night, God appeared to Solomon and said to him, ask what I shall give you. And Solomon said to God, thou hast dealt with my father David with great long-suffering and kindness, and hast made me king in his place. Now, O Lord God, thy promise to my father David is fulfilled, for thou hast made me king over a people as numerous as the dust of the earth. So he's feeling really how insignificant he is. But yet he is the king. Give me now wisdom and knowledge, that I may go out and come in before the people. For who can rule this great people of thine? Who am I to be ruling all of these people that belong to you? What I need, God, is your wisdom and knowledge. And God said to Solomon, because you had this in mind and did not ask for riches, wealth, or honor, or the life of those who hate you, nor have you even asked for long life. Those are the things most people jump up and say, this is what I need. Yeah. Just give me all the money. I can take care of it from there. Take care of my enemies, then I don't have to run anymore. But not Solomon. God says, because you have not asked for these things, but you have asked for yourself wisdom and knowledge, that you may rule my people, over whom I have made you king. Because you was wise enough to do that, wisdom and knowledge have been granted to you, and I will give you riches and wealth and honor such as none of the kings who were before you has proceeded, nor those who will come after you. He says, I'll give you what you ask, and then I'll give you more. And that's the way God treats us. He will give us what we ask when we come to Him in this humility, and even more. We'll never be able to outgive God. Can't be done. Then I look to go back into the New Testament and find another example. Going back to Matthew, this time we're going back to chapter 18. Matthew chapter 18. I actually have a couple of examples in chapter 18 of Matthew. Another example that we find of this type of humility, of what he may be talking about when he says poor in spirit. Starting with verse 1 and going through the first 5 verses here. It says, at that time the disciples came to Jesus saying, who then is greatest in the kingdom of heaven? We got to have the greatest and the least, don't we? Not really. And he called a child, that's, okay, we'll go ahead with that one. Since I started that one, we'll go with it. And he called a child to himself, and set him before them, and said, truly I say to you, unless you are converted and become like children, you shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever then humbles himself as this child, he is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. So Jesus takes an example from the people, and he takes a child. And he says, here, if you want to be great in the kingdom of heaven, come in like this child, pure and innocent, and totally trusting in God the Father. Without question. The child trusts in its parents, without question, for everything it needs, and it has no cares in the world, for everything is provided. We are children of God. We really have no cares in the world, for He has provided all. It says with that attitude. The other example I have there, also in chapter 18, so we won't have to go too far to find it. Drop down to verse 10. To verse 10, we find another example. It says, see that you do not despise... Well, wait a minute. I have lost. That's... Okay, I wrote it down wrong somewhere along the line. 18, 10 through 14. Well, that's the wrong spot, but I'll tell you. Okay? I won't worry about that. I'll just tell you. Jesus is given an example, and he talks about the Pharisee standing and praying. Standing and praying and saying, you know, Lord, I'm thankful that I'm not like that man over there. That tax collector over there. I'm thankful I'm not like him. So thankful, Lord, and that I'm good. I'm good to go because I'm not like that man. And then the tax collector is almost hid away and does not even raise his eyes to heaven, and he says, Lord, forgive me, the sinner. And Jesus said, I tell you that that tax collector, will go home justified and satisfied, more so than the Pharisee. Because he has that poor in spirit. He's probably doing okay as far as physical things is concerned, but he has that attitude that we need to have. The next verse talks about those who mourn. Those who mourn. We're going back to Matthew 5, verse 4. Who are those that mourn? Our first thought, well, people mourn when tragedy hits, or sickness, or a loved one dies, or something. Is that what he's talking about? Maybe. But how about those that mourn because of the condition of the world, that look out and see the sinners that denounce God and refuse the great gift that He's given them? I believe that He's probably talking about those. He's talking about those of us that mourn because we see our brothers and sisters being persecuted and slaughtered. Those are the ones. Revelations chapter 7. Revelations chapter 7. Verses 14 to 17. And I said to him, my Lord, you know. And he said to me, these are the ones who come out of the great tribulation and they have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. For this reason they are before the throne of God, and they serve him day and night in his temple. And he who sits on the throne shall spread his tabernacle over them. They shall hunger no more, neither thirst any more, neither shall the sun beat down on them, nor any heat. For the Lamb in the center of the throne shall be their shepherd, and shall guide them to springs of the water of life. And God shall wipe every tear from their eyes. Those are the ones that mourn. Verse 5 then talks about the meek or the gentle, and they shall inherit the earth. My first thought is there, well, the shape the earth is in, who would want it? But that's not what God's talking about there, I'm sure. I don't think he really intends for us to inherit the earth in that way, in a physical way. But in a spiritual way, we truly do. And we can find those examples. One of them, I believe, we talked about in class this morning, Proverbs 13, starting at verse 22 and 23. If we flip back there real quick and read that. Verse 22. A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, and the wealth of the sinner is stored up for the righteous. There's something to think about. Who will get it in the end? Abundant food is in the fallow ground of the poor. I took a class a couple of years ago in permaculture where we talked about food and stuff, growing it. One of the saddest things is for a man to be starving to death and standing in his backyard. There's food there. You don't think about it, you just have to know where it's at. But it is swept away by injustice. All that we have can disappear because of injustice. Romans 4, 13 through 17. Romans 4. I told you there's going to be a lot of running back and forth here. How can I do that? Romans 4, 13, 17. For the promise to Abraham, or to the descendant, or to his descendants, that he would be heir of the world, was not through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. Now that's very important to us. What he's saying is that the law, referring to the law of Moses, did not receive the inheritance of Abraham, but rather through the righteousness of faith, because Abraham was before the law. And so we are in that group. We are through the group of righteousness and faith. For if those who are of the law are heirs, faith is made void and the promise nullified. Because that would be to just a small group, and the rest of the world would have no chance. For the law brings about wrath, but where there is no law, neither is there violation. That's a whole different lesson. For this reason, it is by faith that it might be in accordance with grace, in the order that the promise may be certain to all the descendants, not only to those who are of the law, but also to those who are of faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all. When he says the father of us all, he's speaking of all those that have faith in God as he did. That's a whole nother lesson that we really could get into and take a lot of time. To realize that through the righteousness of Christ, we become the descendants of Abraham spiritually. Luke 10:3. Luke 10:3 tells us pretty much where we're at in this world. He says that I send you out as lambs among the wolves. In other words, we're not out there to challenge or to fight them, but to humbly invite them. We are out there realizing that we have the power of God behind us, but we don't use it to threaten. We use it to invite, to persuade, gently, to show mercy as mercy has been shown to us. We don't convert with the sword, we convert with love. That's what he says. You're out there as lambs among the wolves, but I'll take care of you. A couple of end notes. Going back to Psalms 149. Psalms 149. Verse 4. My trifocals do all things to me. For the Lord takes pleasure in his people. He will beautify the afflicted ones with salvation. Think about that. The psalmist says, he will beautify the afflicted ones with salvation. And what has he done for us? 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 1 through 5. This is what Peter says. Therefore, putting aside all malice and all guile, hypocrisy and envy and all slander, like newborn babes, long for the pure milk of the word, that by it you may grow in respect to salvation. You may grow in respect to salvation. What does the psalmist say? Through salvation, he would make it beautiful. If you have tasted the kindness of the Lord, and coming to him as to a living stone, rejected by men, but choice and precious in the sight of God, you also, as living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house for a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. There's the beauty of it all. Salvation through Jesus Christ. How beautiful it is. And through Jesus, we are God's people. but yet we are a humble people. We are not boastful. Trying to tell the world that we're better than they are, but we are humble, telling the world that God loves them as He loves us. And He gave Himself for them as He gave it for us.